Hi everyone, we are back. So I left you last time with a little question to kind of think about how, at least in English and certainly in a lot of other languages, we have kind of a discrepancy between spelling and sound. So we can have, in English anyway, multiple symbols representing the same sound. So if you look here, we have shy, mission, nation, glacial, and shore. So it's five different words with five different ways to represent the sound sh. We have see, seen, see, thief, amoeba, machine. Again, we have six different ways to represent that one sound, that one vowel sound. Kind of going the other way, we can also have multiple sounds represented by the same symbol. So we have xylophone, which with the sound z, and we have box with the sound with the k and a s followed right next to each other. We also have tone, pond, and drone, which depending on your accent or your dialect of English may be different vowel sounds, represented by that one vowel. We have sign, pleasure, resign, again, different sounds represented by one letter, and then father, about, any, age, and apple. Depending on your dialect of English, those may be different vowel sounds. So, when linguists are doing things, they don't want to have to deal with that ambiguity in spelling. So, linguists decided to come up with what's called the International Phonetic Alphabet. This is something that linguists and others use to have a consistent system to transcribe all the different sounds in the world, where we have one symbol for every sound, and every sound has a symbol. So this alphabet is based on certain letter systems we already know. So a lot of them will be based on English letters, but not all of them. And we'll have one symbol for every sound. So, for example, the letter S in the International Phonetic Alphabet will represent a voiceless alveolar fricative. So voiceless because the vocal cords aren't vibrating, alveolar because it's made when the tongue contacts the alveolar ridge, and then fricative because it's got a lot of constriction in the mouth, but there is still some amount of continuous airflow. So the letter S here represents the first sound in the word see, but it doesn't represent the first sound in the word sure or the final consonant in the word wise. So the International Phonetic Alphabet in some cases will match up to an English spelling or pronunciation, but in a lot of cases it won't. One other thing about the International Phonetic Alphabet is that it's not going to have any digraphs. So a digraph is basically when we have two letters representing one sound. The International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA, as I will call it from now on, has a strict system of one symbol represents one sound. It's not going to have two letters representing one sound. And then another convention that I will mention here is that with the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA, we will use square brackets, and inside those square brackets will be the symbols. So basically, when we have square brackets, that indicates that we're talking about the IPA sound rather than, for example, the English letter. So on that little bullet point that says one symbol for every sound, we have the S inside brackets. That means we're talking about the S, or the voiceless alveolar fricative sound, rather than the letter S. So in the bottom example, we have this word, the sequence of sounds, which does happen to be pronounced as brackets. This is inside the square brackets, and that means we're talking about the sounds represented by these symbols rather than the English letters or the letters from whatever other language. There are a few major differences between the IPA and English consonant symbols. For the most part, or for a lot of it, there will be a pretty good matchup between English and the IPA, but it's not going to be a complete match. We have here a Greek letter. This letter is going to represent the voiceless interdental fricative. So this sound that's being represented here is the th in theme or in bath. So when you think of the th sound that happens to be voiceless, that's going to be represented by this letter here. When you think of the th sound that is voiced, or the voiced interdental fricative, that's going to be represented by this little letter here. So that sound is the sound in those or with. So here we have the two different interdental fricatives, and they also both happen to have a non-English letter representing their sound. Another one to look at is the sound for the voiceless postalveolar fricative. That's represented by this little symbol here. So that's going to be the conventional sh sound, like in shoe or wish. So when you think of the sh sound, that's going to be represented by this symbol. Then we have the voiced counterpart to that sh sound. So this is the zh sound. This is the voiced postalveolar fricative. This is the sound you might see in rouge or vision. Then we have the affricates, which, because they are really kind of stops followed by fricatives, these really are two sounds. Just you'll see them together so commonly that sometimes they will be referred to as one sound. So we have the t or the t followed by the sh. This is the voiceless postalveolar affricate. We have the voiceless t and the voiceless sh, so really two different sounds, but they occur really close together, so sometimes people consider them to be one sound. You might see this in chick or each. Then we have the voiced equivalent to that, the d and the zh, or the voiced postalveolar affricate. This is the first sound in June, or the last sound in page. Okay, a few others. We have what's called the central alveolar approximant. This is in English what we have when we say the letter R. For us, this is basically just an upside down R. The reason it is the upside down R instead of a right side up R is that the right side up R is actually already taken by a sound that is in other languages that we don't really have in English. So here we have the central alveolar approximant that is represented by this upside down R. So this is the sound, for example, in red or car. Basically, you can think of it like an R just upside down, and that's the R sound we'll have in English. We do have this other sound in English called a flap. This flap is kind of like the letter D sound or the letter T sound, but it's just said really quickly. The tongue very, very briefly will brush the top of the mouth. The flap is something that you might hear in the word atom or kitty. We're not actually saying kitty or atom. We're saying atom or kitty, kind of really, really just very briefly tapping the top of our mouth with the tongue. We also have the palatal glide. So in English, the letter J is frequently used to make one of those affricate sounds, j. However, in the IPA, it will always make a y sound. So when we see the letter J in the IPA, it's really representing what, as English speakers, we might think of as the sound represented by the letter Y. So this is the sound in yes, or bayonet, for example. And then we have the velar nasal stop. So this is the sound that in English we frequently will think of as represented by the letters N and G. So something like sing, the ng sound is what we'll think of as the velar nasal stop. If you want, you can maybe look at this as this sound symbol as a combination of the letter N and then the tail on the bottom of the letter G, if that helps. So if you see the N with a little G tail or G hook on the bottom, you could think of that as a N or an N and a G together in English. And then we have the glottal stop, which is the sound that I mentioned that's kind of hard to think of or hard to hear on its own. This is when the vocal cords themselves are actually used to make a sound and not the rest of the mouth. So like uh-oh or Hawaii. We have kind of a almost sounds like a gulping or swallowing in between some of the other sounds. So that was a lot of sounds that I just went over. There are actually charts that can kind of make this easier to handle. I do in no way expect you to memorize all of these sounds and where they are. You can pretty much always have one of these IPA charts in front of you whenever you're taking any test or quiz or anything. If you're going to have any one chart to help you in linguistics, this is probably going to be one of the most useful ones. So this one is somewhat from your book, if you have the book. But the way to kind of use this chart is look at these top labels here. These labels up here are the places of articulation. So the bilabial sounds are all going to be in this column. The labiodental sounds, this column. Interdental, this column. Alveolar, here. Postalveolar. Palatal, velar, and glottal. This column here has the labels for the manners of articulation. So this top row is going to be the oral stops. This next row is the nasal stops. Then we have the fricatives, the affricates, the approximants, both central and lateral. You don't need to distinguish between those two for anything I will be giving you. That's just something that your book did in the chart, so I kept it the same here. And then we have the flap sound. One thing that you may or may not have noticed in this chart is that when we have these pairs, so for example, we have two bilabial stops, two alveolar stops, two alveolar fricatives, and so on and so forth. In all of those cases, I have put the voiceless sound of the pair on the left and the voiced sound on the right. So basically, a way you can use this chart is if you want to find, for example, the postalveolar voiceless fricative. You can go to postalveolar, and then you can kind of follow it down to the row for fricative. And if you're looking for voiceless, that's the one on the left. Maybe you want to find the interdental voiced affricate. So you can say interdental, affricate, and then look, there's not one. So if you're trying to find a certain description of a sound, that's the way to use it. You can also kind of go the other way. What is the description of a sound for a given symbol? So for example, if I've asked you on a test or quiz to say, okay, what sound is represented by this symbol? And the symbol is something like the letter K. Find the letter K. It's on the left in its pair, so you know it's voiceless. You see that it's in the velar column, and you see that it's in the stop row. So you know it's a voiceless velar stop. when a letter or a symbol is on its own, you don't need to worry about voiced or voiceless. So hopefully that chart description and how to use it is relatively straightforward. You will probably want to have this chart and be comfortable using it when you get to the quiz at the end of this week. So try to make sure you're comfortable with using this chart. If you feel like you're having trouble, go ahead and send me a message or an email, and I'll try to help you through it. So that's kind of the end of the introduction to the IPA. Moving on, we will be talking about vowels, because so far we've just looked at consonants and how they're represented and how they're made. So in the next section, we will be looking at vowels.